Hey everyone, one of the things that keeps DBD going over the years is of course the chapters. When I say chapter, by the way, I will be including the half chapters and paragraphs. It's a little easier to just call them all chapters. Today I wanted to look at them all and discuss both a like and dislike I have for each. As always, let me know your thoughts too down below. Chapter 1, the Last Breath chapter, I both like and dislike for the introduction of the nurse. Nurse is a really cool character in the way she phases through walls, her sounds, her visuals, but she also broke the game very early on, to a somewhat irreversible point, where she will now likely will and always be the strongest character in the game. It's nice to have that constant in some ways, but it also kinda sucks, I guess. Chapter 2, the Halloween chapter, I like for its gameplay feeling like you're actually facing Myers. I think the way he stalks and his overall visual appearance and sound design is so great. My dislike is the constantly problematic Haddonfield, where even with the reworks, I have to say feels a bit off still and has often rough gameplay. Chapter 3 of Flesh and Mud, I absolutely love the name of this chapter for whatever reason. I love the way it's phrased, it sounds so horrific and intriguing, I guess. The downside would be the release of the swamp maps, which feel as if they've received very little love since their release. Paragraph 1, Left Behind, I like for the gameplay of Bill, and just how fitting his perks feel in-game with his character. My dislike is kind of that borrowed time became base kit, with the hatch being nerfed, and at one point there being suggestions of base kit unbreakable. It just feels like poor old Bill is being picked on a bit. Chapter 4, Spark of Madness, is one of the best chapters as an overall themed chapter, I suppose. Every aspect of the chapter works well together, and it all feels very grounded and creepy, which I think was good, particularly for the early days of the game. Dislike is that Doctor is annoying sometimes. Chapter 5, A Lullaby for the Dark, introduced a lot of unique gameplay, with Huntress being the first ranged character, and David having challenge type perks like No Mither, and of course the unique ability of Dead Hard. The main disappointment of this chapter is probably just Huntress's really terrible perks. Paragraph 2, Leatherface. My dislike is that it's quite clear that it was rushed from the very beginning, and the paragraph still suffers as a result of that today. Upside is... I guess the perks are named well and have some good references to the films. Chapter 6, A Nightmare on Elm Street, I like for the unique visuals. This was somewhat lost with Freddy's rework and lacking the ability to pull survivors into the dream world, but still the dream world looks very unique and I enjoy the look of it. My dislike is just how all this content eventually turned out, I suppose. I do think it's to do with some licensing stuff, but it still sucks that this chapter overall is just quite dull and uninteresting. Chapter 7, the Saw chapter, I think is great for the gameplay elements it introduced, with Pig's unique trap style and Tap's unique perk set. Pig in particular has a very unique power, I think, with her combination of her ambush and traps. Dislike is mainly the problematic nature of the game. The map has always just felt very weird and unbalanced in some way, I think. Chapter 8, Curtain Call, I dislike for introducing the dullest power in the game, with Clown's bottles. I like the performative element of this chapter, with two reflected performers, and how this is expressed in game with small things like Kate's perks, having song lyrics as flavor text. Chapter 9, Shattered Bloodline, I really just dislike for Spirit's power. It's so bad, I think, and I just really hate how the whole aspect of little counterplay and invisible killer. My like is Adam's gameplay, I suppose, having a bunch of unique gameplay elements that are fun to interact with, the challenge of autodidact, the potential of deliverance, and the fun of Pebble. Chapter 10, Darkness Among Us, I like for the snowy setting of Ormond. I do however wish that Ormond was fleshed out a bit more, I suppose. The cabin described in the lore feels wildly different from the one in game. It'd be nice to have some more elements of Jeff on the map, more things from Legion's lore like the stolen road signs and stuff like that. Chapter 11, Demise of the Faithful, has debatably the most unique match of characters with Jane and Plague, who are both extremely different but also very similar. My dislike is the restriction sometimes of Plague's power, and how it often nullifies a bunch of perks by just existing. That kind of annoys me. Paragraph 3, Ash vs Evil Dead. I like for Bruce Campbell's appearance and voice, and the perks they chose, as well as the names they gave to the perks. My dislike is that his actual in-game appearance isn't the best, and I think he could honestly use a bit of an update. Chapter 12 for Ghostface was very well done as a half-licensed, half-original character, and this really shows with his popularity in the community. My dislike is weirdly how vague, kind of, his base lore is. I somewhat wish it would have gone into more detail, particularly with how it was written as a newspaper article. Chapter 13, Stranger Things, was amazing for the game and debatably the biggest, or at least most relevant chapter we've ever gotten. Dislike, it's gone. Chapter 14, Curse Legacy, has some of the best original characters in the game, with the downside being that it stops at the chapter, no tomes yet. I suppose in relation to the chapter I'd phrase it as, leaves me wanting more, which is like a debatable dislike in fairness. Chapter 15, Chains of Hate, has the coolest atmosphere of almost any of the chapters, with the maps, music themes, and characters all fitting together very nicely. My dislike is honestly just going to be the same as Curse Legacy. It feels like it needs more, particularly after all this time. Chapter 16, Silent Hill, brought along one of my favourite powers in the game with Pyramid Head. I greatly enjoy his loaded kit. It has so much and just lots to play around with. I don't like how terrible this chapter's perks and add-ons are. It's honestly like the only downside about the whole thing. Chapter 17, Descend Beyond, was interesting to be honest for its lore and the way it took things in a different route, with Talbot being somewhat of a troubled genius who later becomes corrupted, and Felix being conflicted on the disappearance of his parents, and ultimately has the same fate, leaving his own child behind. My dislike is kind of also of the lore though, and how I feel it progresses a bit too quickly, and doesn't explore some areas like Felix and the Pariahs more, or Talbot's transformation. Chapter 18, A Binding of Kin. My dislike is this one is one of the most visually boring chapters I think. From the chapter artwork to the twins, Elodie kinda saves it. There was something about this whole release that was just very drab, I think. It didn't engage or excite me really from the get-go. My like is that underneath that it is actually a good chapter, with solid lore, an interesting power and more. I think it was kind of fumbled in the presentation and marketing to be honest. Chapter 19, All Kill. I like for the absolutely awesome trailers it had, and artwork and the music that came along with it. It was so amazing and so different, and I love the unique animations and such that came with this chapter. My dislike is the lack of map. This chapter felt so perfect for a themed city or neon map, a type of map that we don't really have. Chapter 20, Resident Evil. I like for how faithfully it visually transferred over everyone, with the map looking stunning, the characters looking on point, the perks even being very faithful. My dislike is how the gameplay functions, I suppose, particularly Nemesis. He just feels unlike Nemesis. The rampaging tyrant which would storm towards you on the streets of Raccoon City now barrels towards you with a funny run and tries to slap you with his little arm tentacle. Looks like RE, but doesn't quite feel like it. Chapter 21, Hellraiser, is great for the atmosphere Pinhead brings to the trials, with his voice lines and just overall presence, I suppose. Downside is that this chapter lacks quite a bit, with no survivor, map, and lots of lackluster add-ons. It's a shame in that regard. Chapter 21.5, Hour of the Witch. I love for the introduction of a new perk type. I'm pretty on boons nowadays, but I still appreciate the release of them and how they shook the meta a little, at a time when the meta kind of needed it. Downside is this is maybe the most lacking in content DLC we've had, particularly with boons receiving a lot of nerfs over the years. Chapter 22, Portrait of a Murder. I actually quite like for the lore. As much as Carmina's story is, I think, overall, I do like the overall darkness and tragedy of this chapter's characters. It relays so well how creepy and manipulative the entity is, with both Carmina and Jone. It was good entity development. Dislike is we didn't get crow perks. Still angry about that. Chapter 23, Sadako Rising, I like for the horror it brought back to the game after a long while. From small things like Sadako's jump scares in the lobby, to things like the lore even, which I found quite chilling. My dislike is mainly the lack of attention Sadako and Yuichi seem to get. We did get the recent rework at least. Chapter 24, Roots of Dread, was amazing for horror also. Dredge is disturbing, Garden is disturbing both in sound design and gameplay, and even Hattie carries a great solemnness to her it feels, with her experiencing a lot of trauma in her past. Garden in particular has the coolest sound design, and I really love the setting and the visuals, but man does it play like Chapter 25, Resident Evil Project W, I like for the characters' visuals. There's a lot of small things in this chapter that are really great, like Rebecca's little thumbs up animation, and small details like Wesker losing his sunglasses when stunned, or wagging his finger. My dislike is that I think this chapter could have been spaced a little farther from the original RE chapter. Very petty complaint there, but I think maybe they released it a little too closely. Chapter 26, Forged in Fog, is a chapter which is both good and bad for the same reason I think, and that's the AI. Good in the sense of being innovative and exploring this new thing, bad in the sense that, particularly on release, it didn't feel properly tested, and to be honest, it's quite boring when implemented into Knight's power. Chapter 27, Tools of Torment. I love how it introduced the concept of revisiting maps and altering them entirely, with new characters making their mark on them. It was an awesome idea to have Merchant set up her base on the empty Shelter Woods, combining old and new. My dislike is literally just Merchant's mask. I'm actually okay with everything else about her, I just think the mask looks really dumb. Chapter 28, End Transmission, is kind of a like and dislike in the same thing for me, and that's the exploration of the characters and setting they're in. I really like that we finally got a future-based chapter, with AI, cloning and more, but I wish we had more exploration into it being set in the future, if that makes sense. More stuff relating to exploring Devaka, and how different it is, particularly in the lore. The map does this visually, but I wish the lore touched on it more. Chapter 28.5, Nicolas Cage. My like is just how fun this chapter is. I love how much fun it has, the perks, the lore, the voice lines. It's also great, and just what we needed I think. My dislike is maybe that Nicolas looks a little weird sometimes facially, I suppose. That's not much of an issue though. Chapter 29, Alien, I think can be praised for all of the small details. There are so many animations, visuals, map secrets that make this chapter so incredible. My dislike, I guess, is that Ripley doesn't have Sigourney Weaver's likeness, but I imagine that was unavoidable. Alright, well, that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your likes and dislikes for the chapters too, down below. Thanks, and goodbye.